Change. I see a face.
You know when I'm on his side.
No. You used to hold goofy, KK, bro. I know you in real life, bro. You used to be my lord. You used to be my man.
He was once the face of Sevside, the voice blasting from every speaker, and the name buzzing across New York's drill scene. K-Flock's rise was fast, loud, and impossible to ignore. In just a short time, he went from local street buzz to a breakout superstar, earning millions of views, industry attention, and a loyal fan base that believed he was next up. But behind the viral songs and raw energy, a darker reality was quietly building, one that would eventually turn his success into a federal nightmare. K-Flock's story isn't just about music. It's about how fame, street ties, and visibility can collide in the most dangerous way possible. As his music gained traction, law enforcement attention grew just as quickly. Lyrics were analyzed, associations were questioned, and past incidents were re-examined under a microscope. What fans saw as raw authenticity, prosecutors allegedly viewed as pieces of a much larger puzzle. The transformation from rap star to RICO target didn't happen overnight. It unfolded step by step through social media posts, music videos, affiliations, and moments that once seemed harmless but later carried heavy consequences. Friends became co-defendants, lyrics turned into evidence, and the same streets that helped build his image became central to the case against him. The line between performance and real life began to blur, and that blur would cost him everything. What makes K-Flock's fall so shocking is how quickly it happened. One moment, he was being praised as the future of Bronx drill. The next, his name was tied to indictments, serious charges, and the possibility of spending decades behind bars. Fans were left stunned, asking the same question over and over again. How did it all go so wrong so fast? This isn't just a story about one rapper, it's a warning. A look into how the modern drill era, fueled by social media and street credibility, can turn success into surveillance. K-Flock's journey forces us to confront a harsh truth. In today's world, the spotlight doesn't just bring fame, it brings consequences. And once the system starts watching, there's no turning back. K-Flock's rise from the streets of the Bronx to becoming one of the most talked about names in New York drill was fast, raw, and impossible to ignore. Coming out of the Sevside section, he represented a new generation of artists who turned lived experience into music that felt unfiltered and urgent. His sound wasn't polished for radio. It was aggressive, emotional, and deeply rooted in the realities of his environment. That authenticity is exactly what made him blow up so quickly, but it also placed him under a spotlight that few from his background are ever prepared for. Growing up in the Bronx, K-Flock was surrounded by the same pressures that shape many young men in high-conflict neighborhoods: territorial disputes, constant surveillance from rivals, and the unspoken rules of street loyalty. Music became both an outlet and a weapon. Every bar carried weight. Every video location sent a message, and every lyric was dissected by fans and opponents alike. When his early tracks started gaining traction online, it was clear he wasn't just another local rapper. He was becoming a voice for Sevside, whether he wanted that responsibility or not. His breakout moment didn't come from industry backing or mainstream platforms. It came from raw energy, viral clips, and street credibility. Songs spread rapidly on YouTube and social media, fueled by aggressive beats, confrontational lyrics, and visuals that reflected real neighborhoods. Fans connected with the intensity, while critics noted how closely his music mirrored ongoing street conflicts. In New York drill, that line between art and real life is thin, and K-Flock walked it every time he dropped a record. As his popularity grew, so did the attention, not just from fans, but from law enforcement and media outlets. Drill music had already been under scrutiny in New York, with officials openly debating whether lyrics and videos were contributing to real-world violence. Artists like K-Flock became central figures in that conversation. His name was increasingly mentioned not just in music discussions, but in broader debates about public safety, social media, and how much responsibility artists should carry for the environments they represent. Despite the growing pressure, K-Flock's momentum didn't slow down. Collaborations, reaction videos, and street buzz pushed him further into the spotlight. He wasn't just a Sevside rapper anymore. He was a symbol of Bronx drill's most aggressive era. Every appearance, every post, and every lyric was watched closely. Supporters saw a young artist finally getting recognition, while critics argued that the same visibility was drawing unwanted consequences. Behind the scenes, the environment around him remained volatile. Rivalries that existed long before fame didn't disappear when the cameras turned on. In fact, exposure often made them worse. According to publicly discussed reports and media narratives, conflicts tied to neighborhoods and affiliations continued to escalate, and artists were no longer just entertainers. They were perceived as representatives of entire blocks. That perception would later play a major role in how authorities viewed the drill scene as a whole. As K-Flock's image grew larger, so did the stakes. Music videos were analyzed frame by frame. Lyrics were interpreted as real-world statements rather than creative expression. Associations, both real and alleged, were scrutinized. What once looked like a rapid rise toward mainstream success slowly began to feel like a countdown, with every move adding to a growing file of attention he could no longer control. This phase of K-Flock's journey is crucial to understanding how a Sevside superstar became entangled in a much larger narrative. His rise wasn't just about talent. It was about timing, environment, and a drill culture that blurred boundaries between identity, music, and street politics. The same authenticity that made him a star also placed him directly in the crosshairs of a system already watching New York drill closely. By the time his name started being mentioned alongside serious legal discussions, the transformation was already underway. K-Flock was no longer seen only as an artist on the rise. To authorities and commentators, he was becoming part of a broader picture, one where music, social media, and alleged street activity intersected in dangerous ways. And this was only the beginning of how that narrative would unfold. As K-Flock's name grew louder in the Bronx and across the internet, the attention surrounding him wasn't limited to fans and music platforms. His rapid rise brought a different kind of spotlight, one that followed patterns, associations, and public behavior rather than chart positions. For many artists emerging from environments shaped by long-standing rivalries, success often magnifies scrutiny, and K-Flock's situation was no different. What once looked like street credibility and authenticity slowly began to resemble something far more dangerous under a federal lens. As drill music gained national traction, law enforcement agencies increasingly paid attention to how lyrics, videos, and social media activity reflected real-world conflicts. Investigators began analyzing online content not as entertainment, but as potential evidence of associations and intent. For artists like K-Flock, whose music was deeply tied to lived experiences and neighborhood identity, this created a risky overlap between artistic expression and perceived criminal narratives. Public posts, affiliations, and appearances were no longer just part of branding. They became data points. K-Flock's growing visibility meant his movements were easier to track and his relationships more closely examined. Being linked, whether directly or indirectly, to individuals already under investigation increased the level of scrutiny. In environments where friendships, collaborations, and neighborhood ties overlap, association alone can become a focal point. Authorities began mapping connections, looking for patterns that suggested coordinated behavior rather than isolated incidents. From the outside, it looked like a classic rise and fall storyline. Internally, it was a tightening net of attention that many artists never realize is closing until it's too late. Another key factor was the way drill culture itself became part of broader discussions about public safety and organized activity. Prosecutors across the country started exploring RICO statutes as a way to address what they viewed as structured, ongoing criminal enterprises. While RICO laws were originally designed to dismantle organized crime syndicates, they have increasingly been applied to street groups when prosecutors believe there is a pattern of coordinated illegal activity. In K-Flock's case, his alleged proximity to certain individuals and incidents placed him within that broader framework of investigation. Media coverage intensified as rumors of federal interest circulated. Headlines shifted from celebrating his musical success to speculating about legal trouble. This shift alone had consequences. Sponsors became cautious, collaboration slowed, and the narrative around K-Flock began to change in the public eye. Fans debated whether he was being unfairly targeted because of his image and background, or whether his rise had been inseparable from the conflict surrounding him. The discussion highlighted a recurring tension in hip-hop. Where does art end and liability begin? Social media played a complicated role in this phase of K-Flock's journey. Clips, posts, and lyrics were endlessly replayed and reinterpreted, often stripped of context. What fans saw as raw storytelling, investigators viewed as potential admissions or signals. The digital footprint that helped propel his career also became one of the most scrutinized elements of his life. Every appearance, caption, and interaction added to a growing archive that authorities could analyze over time. For many observers, the situation exposed a harsh reality faced by young artists from high-risk neighborhoods. Success doesn't always create distance from danger. It can amplify it. Fame increases visibility, and visibility invites examination. K-Flock's rise occurred in a moment when law enforcement strategies were evolving, particularly in how they interpret group dynamics and online behavior. Whether intentional or not, his public persona became entangled with a narrative far larger than music. At this stage, the shift from local superstar to potential RICO target wasn't defined by a single moment, but by accumulation. Patterns, associations, and perception combined to place K-Flock in a category that brought federal attention. Supporters argue that this reflects systemic issues, how young black artists from marginalized communities are policed and prosecuted differently. Critics counter that visibility comes with responsibility, and ignoring that reality can have serious consequences. What's undeniable is that this phase marked a turning point. The dream of music as an escape route collided with the reality that the past doesn't always stay behind. K-Flock's story became less about breakout records and more about how quickly success can intersect with systems built to dismantle perceived networks of influence. In the next section, the focus will shift to how prosecutors reportedly built their broader narrative, how RICO cases function, and what this meant for K-Flock's future, the Bronx drill scene, and artists watching from the sidelines. As K-Flock's legal situation escalated from isolated charges to a sweeping RICO case, the fallout rippled far beyond the courtroom. What once seemed like a single incident tied to street conflict was reframed by prosecutors as part of a larger alleged pattern, one that aimed to connect music, social media, and street activity into a unified criminal enterprise. This shift fundamentally changed how the public, the industry, and the drill culture itself viewed K-Flock's rise and downfall. Importantly, authorities have emphasized that these are allegations being tested in court, but the impact of the RICO label has already been profound. Public reaction split almost instantly. Supporters argue that K-Flock is being targeted because of his visibility and influence, pointing out that drill music often reflects harsh realities rather than creates them. To these fans, the RICO case feels like an attempt to criminalize culture, lyrics, and online personas. They highlight how videos, posts, and song lines, long part of hip-hop expression, are now being interpreted as evidence rather than art. This camp sees K-Flock as a product of his environment who turned lived experience into music, only to have that same authenticity used against him. On the other side, critics argue that the RICO case represents a long-overdue crackdown on cycles of violence that have plagued neighborhoods for years. They point to the prosecution's claim that music and social media weren't just expressions, but tools allegedly used to escalate conflicts, signal affiliations, and intimidate rivals. From this perspective, K-Flock's fame amplified the stakes, making him not just a participant in drill culture but a central figure whose influence carried real-world consequences. The debate quickly moved beyond one artist, becoming a referendum on responsibility, influence, and accountability. The music industry's response has been cautious. Labels, promoters, and collaborators are acutely aware of the legal risks surrounding artists entangled in major cases. While K-Flock's catalog continues to circulate and gain streams, new opportunities have largely stalled. This reflects a broader industry pattern. Once an artist becomes the focal point of a RICO case, uncertainty alone can freeze momentum. Features get delayed, deals get reconsidered, and long-term plans are quietly shelved. Even without a verdict, the weight of the allegations reshapes an artist's trajectory. Drill culture itself has entered a period of introspection. K-Flock's case is now frequently cited alongside others as an example of how law enforcement is adapting its strategies, using digital footprints, lyrics, and affiliations to construct broader narratives. Younger artists are watching closely. Many are reassessing how they present themselves online, what they reference in music, and how closely their public personas align with real-life associations. The line between authenticity and exposure has never felt thinner. For some, this has meant dialing back overt references. For others, it has sparked conversations about whether true safety and longevity are even possible within the genre's traditional framework. Social media has played a powerful role in shaping perception. Clips of K-Flock's performances now circulate alongside court documents, timelines, and commentary videos breaking down the RICO case piece by piece. Every development becomes instant content, analyzed, debated, and reinterpreted in real time. This constant spotlight intensifies the stakes, turning legal proceedings into a form of public spectacle. For fans, it creates a sense of proximity to the case. For critics, it reinforces concerns about glorification versus accountability. There is also a deeper, more uncomfortable conversation unfolding about systemic patterns. Commentators have noted that RICO cases often target groups rather than individuals, reframing community-level issues as organized conspiracies. Supporters of K-Flock argue that this approach risks oversimplifying complex social realities, while proponents claim it is necessary to disrupt entrenched cycles of violence. Regardless of stance, most agree that the implications extend far beyond one rapper. The case signals how aggressively authorities may pursue similar strategies in the future, especially when artists achieve mainstream visibility. For K-Flock's legacy, the RICO case represents a dramatic turning point. His rise from Sevside standout to drill superstar was built on raw energy, viral momentum, and a sound that captured a specific moment in New York streets. Now, that narrative is inseparable from the courtroom battle that threatens to define how history remembers him. Whether viewed as a cautionary tale, a cultural clash, or a symbol of systemic tension, his story has become emblematic of a genre at a crossroads. Ultimately, the RICO case against K-Flock has forced drill culture, the music industry, and fans to confront difficult questions. How much responsibility do artists carry for the worlds they portray? Where does expression end and exposure begin? And can drill continue to thrive under increasing legal scrutiny? As the case moves forward, its outcome will not only shape K-Flock's future but also influence how the next generation of artists navigates fame, authenticity, and survival in an era where every lyric and post can carry legal weight. As federal attention intensified around Sevside and its alleged network, the focus on K-Flock shifted from street notoriety to courtroom reality. What once played out in music videos, social media posts, and neighborhood rivalries began to surface in legal filings, discovery motions, and prosecutorial language that framed the situation as a coordinated pattern rather than isolated incidents. This shift marked a critical turning point, one where image, lyrics, and associations were no longer just cultural signals, but potential evidence viewed through the lens of a RICO-style narrative. Investigators, according to publicly discussed reporting in court proceedings, began assembling timelines that stretched across months and years. Rather than focusing on a single incident, authorities examined alleged relationships, communications, and patterns of behavior. The strategy was clear: present a broader picture that suggested organization, continuity, and intent. For someone like K-Flock, whose rise was deeply intertwined with Sevside identity, this approach meant that reputation and proximity became as consequential as direct actions. The same affiliations that once boosted credibility in the streets now carried legal risk. Legal analysts have often noted that RICO-style cases rely heavily on storytelling, connecting dots between people, places, and moments to establish a collective structure. In this context, lyrics, music videos, social media posts, and even public appearances can be scrutinized not as art or branding, but as circumstantial material. Prosecutors may argue that repeated references, symbols, and associations demonstrate alignment with a broader enterprise, while defense teams counter that artistic expression and neighborhood identity do not equate to criminal conspiracy. This tension between culture and law sits at the heart of K-Flock's turning point. As pressure mounted, K-Flock's legal strategy became central to public discussion. Defense arguments have consistently emphasized the distinction between performance and reality, between a rapper's persona and provable conduct. Attorneys often challenge the reliability of informants, the interpretation of digital evidence, and the assumption that affiliation equals participation. The goal is to dismantle the narrative of organization and intent, reframing the case as one built on inference rather than concrete proof. For fans watching from the outside, this legal chess match highlights how drastically the stakes change once federal-style scrutiny enters the picture. This phase also exposed the limits of street fame as protection. In earlier stages of his rise, K-Flock's popularity seemed to offer insulation, attention, support, and a sense of momentum that made legal trouble feel distant or manageable. But as the case progressed, it became clear that visibility cuts both ways. High profile brings documentation, surveillance, and a permanent digital footprint. Moments once celebrated by fans could now be replayed, slowed down, and reinterpreted under adversarial scrutiny. The very tools that helped build his platform became tools that complicated his defense. Within the community, reactions to this turning point were mixed. Some supporters viewed the case as an example of systemic overreach, arguing that law enforcement targets young artists from specific neighborhoods by criminalizing culture and association. Others saw it as a predictable outcome of blurred lines between music, street identity, and real-world conflict. These debates unfolded across social media, interviews, and commentary videos, reflecting a broader conversation about how young rappers navigate environments where authenticity is rewarded culturally but punished legally. For K-Flock personally, this period represented a narrowing of options. The transition from local superstar to RICO target reframed his future around court dates, legal filings, and uncertainty. The momentum that once pushed his career forward slowed, replaced by long stretches of waiting and legal preparation. Observers noted how quickly the narrative changed, from rising star to cautionary figure, illustrating how fragile success can be when legal systems intersect with street-rooted fame. This turning point also forced a re-evaluation of the Sevside image itself. What once functioned as a badge of loyalty and identity was now examined as a possible structure under federal-style scrutiny. For younger artists watching closely, the message was sobering. Affiliation carries weight far beyond music. The shift signaled that the era of treating neighborhood branding as harmless aesthetic might be ending, replaced by an environment where symbolism and association are legally consequential. Ultimately, this stage of K-Flock's story is less about verdicts and more about transformation. It marks the moment where the narrative stopped being driven by music releases and viral moments, and became dominated by legal strategy and long-term consequences. The RICO pressure didn't just change how the public viewed him, it changed the framework of his entire story, turning a Sevside superstar into a symbol of how quickly fame, identity, and the justice system can collide. The transformation of K-Flock's public image, from a Sevside breakout star to a central figure mentioned in a federal RICO case, marks a sobering chapter not only in his own story, but in the wider narrative of drill music and street culture in New York. By the time authorities unveiled the scope of their investigation, the damage to momentum, freedom, and perception was already profound. What followed was a ripple effect that extended far beyond one artist, reshaping conversations about accountability, influence, and the cost of visibility in an era where music, social media, and street identity collide. For K-Flock personally, the fallout was immediate and severe. Court proceedings, incarceration, and the weight of federal scrutiny halted what had once seemed like an unstoppable rise. Studio plans, collaborations, tours, and brand opportunities evaporated overnight. An artist who had been defining the sound and energy of Bronx drill suddenly found his future dictated not by charts or fans, but by legal timelines and courtroom outcomes. Regardless of how the case ultimately resolves, the interruption alone stands as a stark reminder of how fragile success can be when legal exposure enters the picture. Beyond the individual consequences, the case sent shockwaves through the Bronx drill scene. Fellow artists, producers, and affiliates watched closely as lyrics, videos, and online behavior were scrutinized as potential evidence rather than artistic expression. The message was clear: visibility cuts both ways. The same content that fuels virality can also be reframed under legal lenses, especially when authorities believe it reflects real-world activity. As a result, many artists began reassessing how much of their personal lives, affiliations, and conflicts they were willing to broadcast publicly. The use of RICO statutes amplified these concerns. Unlike traditional charges that focus on isolated incidents, RICO cases examine patterns, associations, and long-term behavior. For the drill scene, this raised uncomfortable questions about whether collective identity, crews, neighborhoods, or movements could become liabilities. Artists who once relied on group branding and street authenticity now face the reality that proximity alone could carry consequences, even without direct involvement in specific acts. Public opinion around K-Flock's situation became deeply divided. Supporters argued that he was being targeted because of his background, image, and the aggressive nature of his music, framing the case as an example of systemic overreach. Critics, on the other hand, viewed the investigation as an inevitable response to years of escalating violence and online provocation. This divide mirrored broader societal debates about drill music itself, whether it is a reflection of harsh realities or contributed to them. The industry response was cautious. Labels, platforms, and promoters became more selective, weighing potential risk alongside talent. While drill remained commercially powerful, the appetite for unchecked controversy diminished. Executives increasingly emphasized distance from street conflicts, encouraging artists to pivot toward broader narratives or more controlled public personas. In this environment, K-Flock's situation became a reference point, a case study discussed behind closed doors as an example of how quickly opportunity can turn into exposure. K-Flock's legacy now exists in a complicated space. Musically, his influence on Bronx drill is undeniable. His energy, delivery, and presence helped propel the sound into mainstream awareness, inspiring a new generation of artists. Tracks that once symbolized momentum and dominance are now listened to through a different lens, led with context and consequence. For fans, this duality is difficult to reconcile. Admiration for the art alongside the gravity of the circumstances surrounding the artist. Culturally, the story forces a reckoning. It challenges young artists to think critically about the narratives they build and the lines between performance, authenticity, and real-life implication. It also pushes audiences to question their own role in amplifying conflict-driven content, rewarding escalation with views and clout. K-Flock's rise and fall highlight how modern fame accelerates everything: success, scrutiny, and consequences alike. Looking forward, the long-term impact of the case may be its cautionary value. Whether viewed as a warning, a tragedy, or a turning point, it underscores the importance of strategy, awareness, and separation between art and actions. For emerging artists watching from the sidelines, the lesson is not simply about avoiding trouble, but about understanding how systems, legal, digital, and cultural, interact in ways that can redefine a life overnight. In the end, K-Flock's journey from Sevside superstar to RICO target is not just about one individual. It is a reflection of a moment in music history where creativity, environment, and enforcement collided head-on. How his story is ultimately remembered will depend on legal outcomes, personal growth, and how the culture evolves in response. But one thing is certain: his rise and the fallout that followed have permanently shaped the conversation around drill, fame, and the true cost of living loudly in the spotlight. K-Flock's journey from Sevside stardom to becoming a central figure in a RICO case has shocked fans and reshaped how people view drill culture, fame, and street politics. This story isn't just about music. It's about how fast success, loyalty, and visibility can collide with law enforcement scrutiny and life-changing consequences. If you followed every part of this breakdown, now it's your turn to speak up. Do you think K-Flock was a product of his environment, or did the spotlight accelerate his downfall? What lessons should upcoming artists take from his rise and the legal storm that followed? Drop your thoughts in the comments and join the conversation as fans continue to debate accountability, survival, and the real cost of fame in the drill scene. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more deep dives, real stories, and uncensored breakdowns of hip-hop's most controversial moments.